Chapter 8 Dealing with Pain 2009 was my fourth year as a MAD volunteer at Sneha's Children's Home. While I was fully committed to MAD, my real loyalty lay with Sneha's Children's Home and more specifically with the children housed there. But it was also true that while I had traveled a long way in understanding the lives at Sneha's Children's Home, my grasp of their reality was as yet incomplete. Ostensibly, everything was fine with their lives. The children were provided with the basics of food, shelter, and education. They were safe, healthy, cheerful. They were provided with opportunities that were denied to them in their homes. And yet, there was the intense longing for home, occasional runaways, and an undefined deficit that made for an incomplete life. An interaction, an incident, a conversation, every now and then something cropped up that drew attention to this deficit. Slowly but surely, over time, I was beginning to fit the pieces of the puzzle together to form the complete picture. One of the most startling insights into their lives was with regard to their relationship with pain, the one common factor in all their lives. One Saturday, I burned my arm while ironing clothes and was left with a long red burn mark on the inside of my forearm. When I went to Sneha's Children's Home that afternoon, the reaction of the children at the center was completely unexpected. A reaction in itself was surprising because I did not expect one at all. Since the mark was on the inside of my forearm and not immediately visible, even my family had barely noticed it. So I was startled to find that every child who crossed me at Sneha's Children's Home that day not only noticed the scar but lingered over it. Questions, concern, empathy, all these flitted across the young faces, and one or two even ran their fingers gently and reassuringly over the blood. What happened? They asked gently. There lay knowledge beyond their years in the question. They knew things that no child should ever know. The children were, I realized, shockingly familiar with pain. Even the littlest ones had the ability to recognize it. They homed in on suffering like heat-seeking missiles zooming into a warm target. Considering all that I knew of them, it should not have come as a surprise. Apart from knowledge of their background stories, I had witnessed events that no child should have to live through. When I think pain, visuals flash through my mind. Senthil, Rajesh, Akram, Bhai. Shortly after Munna ran away, I overheard the children make toilet jokes about Senthil. They just laughed dismissively when I questioned them further. He is always running to the bathroom at night. It didn't seem like anything much, but I was still fresh from Munna disaster and I was unable to just drop the issue. After at least half a dozen conversations, Senthil decided to tell me the truth, just the basic minimum to get me off his back. No, he did not have any infection or illness. And no, he did not really need to use the bathroom frequently at night, or otherwise for that matter. On cloudy nights, I can't see the stars before going to sleep, he said. I checked to see if the clouds have lifted later in the night. He was quiet for a long time after that. I waited. When he saw that I wasn't about to go away, he continued. My mother is a star now, so I look for her, he said, and walked away. He was referring to the folklore that our loved ones are reborn as stars to watch over us. When it came to cheesy fables, it was the cheesiest of them all. Nobody really believed it, not even children or the gullible. Or so I thought, but I was wrong. When you were drowning, apparently even a fiber of a straw can provide a grip. The week after, I made him a bookmark with a large silver star. For the nights when you can't see the stars, I told him. He smiled widely. He smiled widely, but we never took the conversation any further, and I got nothing about his family from his records at the children's home. As I watched him grow from a child to a teenager to an adult at the children's home, I had enough time to ponder over his probable history. But it took 8 years for Senthil to tell me the full story, and on his 18th birthday, we finally finished the conversation. In sharp contrast, Rajesh's grief was both overt and obvious. Rajesh was at Sneha Children's Home for a short spell, just over a year. He was at Children's Home because his family had fallen into destitution due to his father's chronic illness. His father was now confined to bed, leaving his mother to keep the wheels running. Leaving his mother to keep the wheels turning. His mother, who worked as a home nurse, took on additional work, but the money she brought in was barely enough to make ends meet. Since schooling was a luxury, they could no longer afford to avoid any disruption in his education. Rajesh was placed in Sneha Children's Home. Being plucked away from home was wrenching enough. What compounded the problem was the infrequent and erratic family visits. They called every week, but his father's immobility and mother's tight work schedule meant that visits were few and far in between. One Sunday afternoon, Rajesh was at the gate when I came in for my class. Freshly bathed and sweet smelling, his hair was wet and slicked back and face soaked with talcum powder. He swung the gate back and forth in an impatient manner, his gaze fixed on the road outside. I stopped to talk him. But at that moment, a bus came down the road and stopped at the bus stop opposite. Rajesh brushed me aside, craning his neck to get a look at the people getting off. He searched the crowd for a while and then moved back to the gate, swinging it and watching the road. His friends confirmed that he was waiting for his mother's visit. She had called up the previous night and told him that she would come in after lunch. I looked at my watch. It was already 3 p.m. and time for my class. I showed the, cho- I showed the children into the classroom, wondering whether to get Rajesh in too. But one look at him at the gate, and I knew that it would be a wasted effort. Even if I did manage to drag him into the classroom, I was not likely to get the slightest bit of attention from him. The class began, and I was caught up in maintaining class discipline and getting my students' attention. Time passed in flurry, and suddenly, an hour into the class, Rajesh entered the room. He entered so quietly that his presence barely registered. I, he pulled his books out of his desk and sat alone in a corner table at the back of the class. His powder-lined face was smudged and clothes bathed in sweat from standing in the sun. He repeatedly rubbed the moisture off his face with his sleeve, weaving fresh trails of grime and sweat into the chalky background. His eyes were dry and hollow with pain. He radiated intense waves of despair that thrust back anyone mindful of approaching. Though no one dared look in his corner, all attention in the classroom was singularly focused on Rajesh. Weighed down by his presence, my usually effervescent class was strangely silent and provided me no distractions from my own dark thoughts. I slammed the lid hard on emotions that threatened to spill over and pegged away doggedly at the lesson on hand. I went through the motions of teaching, my stomach nodding intensely every time I glimpsed him. In the stifling heat, time crawled by in little ticks and talks. While I listened desperately for the dismissal bell, it was the longest afternoon of my life. Before the echoes of the bell had died away, Rajesh was out of the class and tearing away on the football field. His feet barely touched the ground as he took possession of the football and swept across the field. He held on to the ball for the next half hour, barely registering anyone who came his way. No amount of physical bludgeoning, no amount of physical bludgeoning could separate him from the football, and he raced from one end of the ground to another, never stopping to score or to catch a breath. Having run out of verbal rebukes, the other children lost interest in the game and began trickling off the field. Rajesh stayed on dribbling the ball around, and when he finally came away, he received an earful because he was late for bath time. My class was long over, but I hung around waiting. I couldn't leave without doing something. But I was completely out of my depth here. This couldn't be fixed with a band-aid, a chocolate, or a hug, and I knew of no other remedies. I watched helplessly as Rajesh came by after his bath, and for want of anything better to do, I held him by his arms and brushed back his damp hair with my fingers. He smelled squeaky clean, and his smile was as sweet as ever. His eyes were ringed with exhaustion, but he was over the worst. I left him in the TV room, his eyes boring into Tom and Jerry scampering across the screen. The resilience that I had witnessed was admirable, and it was not the first time that I was seeing this either. Time again, I had seen the children bounce back from things that should realistically have caused them a breakdown. But no amount of loss, tragedy, or abuse seemed to dim their sunny outlook. They shrugged it all off and hunkered down to living their lives. But it troubled me that the children were left to deal with such ghastliness all on their own. Beyond glorifying their undying spirit, it had to be asked if they had the emotional capacity to deal with these issues, and if they were not emotionally equipped to resolve them. What mechanism did they use to survive troubled times? And if disaster struck when you were barely out of babyhood, like it happened with Akram, what then? Akram was hard to forget, despite the fact that he came into our lives for just a few days. Within minutes of his arrival, Akram had become the mascot of Sneha's Children's Hope. He was a chubby little 6-year-old, all eyes and smiles. If you weren't bowled over by his expressive eyes, the incredible smile was sure to do the trick. Climbing was his thing. He would clamber up anything that held still. He was always perched atop something: gate, gate post, wall, pillar, doors, goalpost. This earned him the nickname Circus Cootie, Circus Child, and Spider-Man. Crumb's wish was everyone's command. He always had the first chance at batting or the first shot at the football. A single tear from his eyes was enough to bring Sneha's Children's Home to a standstill. Amidst all this laughter and sunshine, it was easy to forget the circumstances that brought. Amidst all this laughter and sunshine, it was easy to forget the circumstances that brought Akram to Sneha Children's Home. His mother and he were found wandering the streets of Kochi one night. At the police station, she appeared dazed and confused and quite unable to provide any of her personal details. Later, it came to light that she was suffering from severe depression and had wandered away from her house a week earlier. Pending a police inquiry, she was placed in a government hospital while Akram was sent to Sneha's children's home. A week later, the police managed to trace their family and contact them, which brought his father to the home. All was well, except for the fact that he was a complete stranger for Akram. Akram's father worked as a laborer in Saudi Arabia with a contract that entitled him to a vacation once every 3 years. Akram was 3 years old when he had last seen his father, too young to form any lasting memory. Already traumatized by the experiences of the last few weeks, Akram refused to go to his father. He wept uncontrollably and pushed his father away every time he came near. He latched onto a staff of Sneha's children's home, burying his face into him and refusing to even face his father. Akram's father was a thin, weary-looking man with a pronounced stoop. He had an unlined face and a head full of rich grey hair. It was impossible to tell if he was a young man who had aged prematurely or an old man who looked young for his age. He sat patiently through it all, periodically reaching out to his son and withdrawing as soon as he was pushed away. Akram wouldn't stop weeping, and his father wouldn't stop trying. By now, the pandemonium had a wider audience. Drawn by the noise, dozens of children had gathered around the office door, witness to the scene. Akram's distress was beginning to tell on the other children, with tears beginning to flow from some of the younger ones. To preempt any escalation of the situation, the center authorities asked the mad volunteers to begin the classes. So the volunteers and the staff cajoled the children away, and we conducted the classes the best that we could. But 2 hours later, I crossed the office on my way out and found the tableau unchanged. Akram was still clutching onto the staff member and crying while his father continued making gentle overtures to him. I knew that when I turned a week later, Akram would be gone, and in all likelihood, I would never see him again. I would never know if it all worked out for him, if his father received the medical help she needed and recovered, if he managed to bond with his father, if he grew up with the security and love of a family, if he ever recovered completely from that eventful week in his young life. It was a question that continued to trouble me. What were the repercussions of these childhood traumas on the children's psyche? Was there a price to be paid for the fast forward of their lives? Or did they really move onward seamlessly, carrying no trace of the past into their future? Did they surmount the past completely, leaving the darkness behind forever? Or was a future marked by unresolved childhood issues? Besides the children housed there on a long-term basis, Sneha Children's Home was also a temporary refuge for street children, runaways, and children rescued from child labor and unsafe family situations. These children were housed here while their future was being secured. Once decisions were made and the legal formalities were completed, they were either shipped back to their family or into a government home closer to their family. As mad volunteers, we had fleeting contact with all of them. They disappeared from our lives as abruptly as they entered it. But despite the transient nature of this relationship, I had some memorable encounters. Vijay, who gave me the keychain as a gift, is a happy memory. Abe, on the other hand, is a disquieting remembrance. He was a silent presence at Sneha Children's home, more a shadow than a person. He spent long hours on the ground, unmoving, gazing at the horizon. He had run away from home, traveling for days across the country till he was finally apprehended by the railway police. Enquiries began, but no information was forthcoming from Abe, apart from the fact that he was from Mumbai and had run away from home after he fell out with his stepmother. He refused to divulge any details which could have him sent back home. So, he was housed at Sneha Children's home till he had simmered down and was ready to go back home. Everyone waited patiently for him to open up. While doling out ample advice to him on the feasibility of adopting the forgive and the forget principle, Abe listened to it all and continued to stare into the distance. At 50, he had the stamina to outlast the entire system. When he heard that I was brought up in Mumbai, he began to seek out my company. Seeking my company is probably an exaggeration. Mostly, he would steal up and sit silently next to me. Sometimes I was not even aware of his presence. Occasionally he smiled, once he talked, but mostly he slipped in and away soundlessly without making eye contact. It was difficult to register Abe's presence even when he was right beside me. He was not just emotionally detached. Most times, his physical presence seemed tenuous as well. Mentally, he managed to reside in a world of his own making, and the intense longing to be elsewhere seemed to spark off a physical fade out as well. At 50, Abe was just an empty shell, and sometimes not even that. What would turn a young teen into fugitive like that? What physical or mental agony had he lived through? Could an outsider feel with him? Even with the best intentions and all the empathy in the world? Where could any of us even begin to gain an insight into his life? Just as abruptly as he had dropped into my life, he vanished. He was sent to a shelter home in Mumbai. Pending enquiries, and I was left with the memory of the only words he had ever spoken to me. आप मुंबई से हैं? Are you from Mumbai? Yet another incomplete story where I was to have no satisfaction of knowing what or why. With a million possibilities and no specifics, the onset and the endings of these stories would forever remain a mystery to me. It seemed unlikely that I would ever find definite answers. Everywhere I looked, there were smiling children, playing, studying, getting on with their lives. The answer then seemed obvious. The children did have the capacity to move on and heal completely. But little things constantly popped up, which seemed to indicate a deceptive surface calm. The abrupt bursts of anger, the tightly reined in emotions, the instinctive recognition of pain, all of this pointed towards something more than the obvious. But I was never sure. I never got more than a glimmer before the surface closed up again. These indicators finally solidified into concrete answers when MAD piloted the mentorship project in 2013. This project was aimed at easing the social integration of our students who had moved out of shelter homes. That's when I was able to compute the true cost of a dysfunctional childhood. My time with MAD and Sneha Children's Home had several life-changing moments. But there was also a more gradual transformation taking place within. My association with the children at Sneha Children's Home was beginning to chip away at my middle class values, or rather at my worldview through a decidedly middle class lens. Most middle class children are brought up to subscribe to the war cry of hard work and persistence. And these become the weapons with which we fight all of life's battles and win a lot of them too. The obvious corollary to this belief is that lost battles signify a lack of both effort and perseverance. And therein lies the rub. While the belief system is commendable in itself, it makes no allowances for any of the social conditions that may negate individual efforts. However, Herculean they may be. And as a consequence, it is a middle class tendency to sniff at poor people and think of them as losers, worthy of charity, but not respect. There is little understanding of their lifestyle. The opinion about them ranging from poor decision makers to lazy and dumb. The accepted wisdom being that if they were capable of rational, sensible decision making, they wouldn't be poor in the first place. Refusal to see poverty as a social and economic distortion and instead pinning the blame on victims is the unkindest cut of all. Dr. Kalam, Dhirubhai Ambani and A.R. Rahman are poster boys for the hard work and overcome all odd brigade. But the reason we celebrate these rags to riches stories is that they are the exception, not the norm. Rags to riches stories are not commonplace occurrences, which is why they fascinate us and entertain us, and their fairy tale aura gives us a warm, fuzzy, happy feeling and allows us to move on with our lives, ignoring the appalling conditions the underclass live in. Once we subscribe to the belief that each individual is entirely responsible for his or her fate, it takes away the culpability of society as a whole and each of us as members of that society. Once upon a time, I too believed that if people did not want to stay poor, they just had to work hard, make use of opportunities that came their way, and take good decisions. Today, it seems laughable that I could have been so ignorant of realities around me. So, when I saw beggars, pavement dwellers, street performers, what did I think? Think is obviously what I did not do. An answer that is as clear as it is shameful. There are reams of studies that chronicle how close to impossible individual effects to climb out of poverty are, and why living in poverty is an unending cycle. Poverty is more than just deprivation. Poverty shapes children's development, loading the scales against them in every possible way. A child born in poverty has lower birth weight, higher chance of dying in infancy, probability of stunted growth, anemia, asthma, chronic health problems due to poor environment, negative impact on brain development, behavioral problems due to chaotic and stressful living conditions, predisposition to emotional disorders and low self-esteem, physical risk of living in unsafe areas and amidst high crime rates, poor education, shoddy schools, ill-equipped teachers. While entering kindergarten at age 4, a child born in poverty has a lower level of school readiness. With little exposure to books or stimulating educational experiences, this academic gap increases rapidly, ending in a yawning academic chasm between poor children and the other students. There was tidal wave of amusement at Rahul Gandhi's assessment that the poor need escape velocity of Jupiter to rise above poverty. The irony of the situation was that this was one time he had finally got something right. The worst of it is not that a poor child needs escape velocity of Jupiter to catch up with his compatriots. The worst part is that we expect him to. It is unbelievable that we should expect a 6-year-old to rise above his daily battle with survival, benefit of care and protection systems, and establish a level playing field with his affluent peers. By sheer strength of character, and probably by looking to Dr. Abdul Kalam for inspiration, we refuse to attribute their failure to lack of access to resources. But when it comes to our own kids, no amount of hand holding and mollycoddling is enough. A whole, dis- a whole industry has sprung up around our determination to give our children the best competitive edge that money can buy. After school tuitions, storytelling and creative writing sessions, music and art lessons, sports practice, personality development classes, we provide our children with every resource that we believe will help them to excel. While we certainly hope for them to build up some sort of a character, it is not something we rely upon to help them overcome all obstacles or succeed in life. As to the question of how people can be so blind to everything outside of their own lives, nobody knows the answer better than I do. I have been there and done that. For 2 decades in Mumbai, my family cohabited with a street family, same street, just a few feet apart. We were practically neighbors. We lived on the first floor and they lived on the pavement below. Harsh lives in full view of the entire street. But I don't remember the mention of the family in any neighborhood discussions. And in the 20 years that I observed them, I don't remember wincing to see them even once. They did not exist. They might have lived on a different plane or even a different planet for all that it mattered. I think more about them today than I did in all those years when we lived next to each other. I especially think of the children and wonder, did they lie awake at nights watching the flickering lights of the television on our window panes? Did they wonder about what went on inside the enclosed walls of homes? Did they notice us trotting off to school each morning? Did they envy us, hate us, or were they indifferent to us too? To see someone for 20 years and yet by unseen, it is easy when you know how. If this tunnel vision is all that you have ever seen around you, then it is the only reality you know. In 2006, when I became a teacher volunteer, I arrived at the gates of Sneha Children's Home with this long personal history of indifference. Even then, I knew the percentages, the statistics, the numbers, and all related facts with respect to child development. I know nothing more today than I knew yesterday. What has changed is that today I know the children and I feel the problem. I also know the difference between knowing a problem and feeling a problem. You can walk away from a problem you know of, but you can never detach yourself from a problem that you feel. You end up committing yourself to resolving it. 2 out of every 3 children that is 66% in India, are physically abused. According to a study commissioned by the Ministry of Women and Child Development, alarming, disturbing, distressing. But however large the numbers, it was easy for me to set them aside and move along. But now, the statistics had a face called Achille, a face that sparkled and twinkled when listening to stories, and crumpled and wrinkled at the mention of studies, smiled and glowed when it slighted you, smiled and glowed when it cited you, and brimmed over when hurt in a fight. Now, 66% ceased to be a number. It was a long, sharp, and dagger that pierced and bled my heart. Estimates of street children in India range from 4 lakh to 8 lakh, although it is difficult to count the number of street children living in India because of their floating, moving often nature. It is not the disquieting number of zeros in the number that causes me a face, that causes me a pause. It is a boy called Saju, a homeless street child brought to Sneha's children's home when he was just 8. A wonderful artist who sketched me at each visit, filled my bag with paper flowers and climbed trees to get me berries. India is home to 12.59 million child laborers, according to the 2001 census, Ministry of Labour and Employment. The numbers fail to tell the story of Raza, who was pulled out of school and sent to work by his father for wages as low as Rs 300 per month. At 9 years, he took the only escape route available to him. He ran away from home. His longing for home and his mother is offset by his fear of being forced back into labor on his return. He cushions himself with dreams for the future. I think I will be good in business, he brags. I will never work for anyone. I will build a huge business, even bigger than Ambani's. The MWCD brought out a report titled Study on Child Abuse India 2007. The study revealed that more than 53% of children in India have probably been sexually abused. Cold numbers no more, but chubby hands within my fist, insistent tugs on my dupatta, and warm breath against my cheek. As I watched the little brown bodies tumble joyously in the grass, I knew the true meaning of travesty. I closed my eyes, feeling the pain go so deep that I felt giddy with despair. In that moment, I had a glimmer of understanding about my failure as a teacher at Sneha Children's Home. But at that point, I only knew that despite best efforts and constant improvements, math classes at Sneha Children's Home weren't really a complete class. It would take a lot more time and thinking to find the solutions they were looking for.